Welcome back, everybody, to the sSEC Weekly Show. I'm your host, Ezeco, and this is the show where we go over virtual college football in the virtual Southeastern Conference. That's right, this is not real college football. If you've tuned in here in the middle of July and you're like, oh, football, it's not real football, guys. We run a simulation league with all crafted players, all crafted teams. It's a great time. If you're a big into college football and you happen to stumble upon this for whatever reason, come check us out. Links will be in the description. Come talk to us in Discord. Kind of see what everything's about and maybe try and grab your own team and challenge yourself. But we are going to be taking a look at week 6 here in the sSEC. And we're just kind of going to jump right into it because there's a lot going on this week. We've got Kentucky taking on number 15 Georgia, Missouri taking on LSU, Mississippi State taking on Alabama, Ole Miss taking on Arkansas, Texas A&M taking on number 2 Auburn, and number 21 South Carolina taking on Florida. Tennessee has graced everybody with a bye week, so the number 1 team is off this week for once. But we do have 6 SEC matchups with the 6 games that we have here. The lone exception being Vanderbilt taking on Louisiana Monroe at Louisiana Monroe, and they're going to try and figure out how to knock Vanderbilt that one away. But there's going to be multiple program measuring games that we're going to look at this week. Kentucky versus Georgia. Kentucky has long been told that they're the top of the SEC. This season and last season they really haven't proved it, but last week was a interesting game from them, and maybe we can see them get back to that mantle, but take it back up. Georgia, on the other hand, has not been a great program the last 2 seasons, but towards the end of last season and at the beginning of this season, they have really taken on the idea that they are a program to be contended with. The other one here is South Carolina versus Florida. South Carolina is having a really good season, but Florida is also right there. And Florida is kind of in the same spot as Georgia, where they've not been great the last couple seasons, but towards the end of last season and the beginning of this season, they have really stepped up and are trying to make a mark as the University of Florida. The last benchmark game I have here circled is Ole Miss taking on Arkansas. Ole Miss is a good program. They're doing good things, but what we saw last year is them being in the same spot at the top of the SEC West, really ready to make a challenge, and right in the middle of the season, everything didn't necessarily fall off a cliff, but they backslid and weren't able to keep it up. So this game versus Arkansas, who's a similar program, is going to see where are they really as a program right now. Can they continue to hold the West and elevate themselves? But you can also see we've got 4 teams here in the top 25 with number 1 Tennessee leading the way and number 2 Auburn right behind them. So the top 2 teams in the top 25 are SEC teams, and then we've got number 15 Georgia and number 21 South Carolina. We always try to measure that, see how well we're doing up against the rest of the country. But we're going to jump right into our games this week, starting off with Kentucky versus number 15 Georgia. And those of you who listened before, you know that I am the Kentucky coach, and this was a heartbreaker game. I'm going to make excuses and say that our starting center was out and Kelvin Dupree really couldn't get any gaps in the line, and Michael Oliveros was really pressured. But at the end of the day, we lost by 18 points. Will Outman had a really good game. He threw the ball 39 times, completed it 27 times for 374 yards. He threw 6 touchdowns for Georgia, but he did throw 3 interceptions. He didn't get sacked any, but he did throw 3 passes to the other team. He hit 6 different receivers. Now, Michael Oliveros for Kentucky, on the other hand, threw 36 passes, completed 26 of them, so a little bit more efficient. 369 yards, but only 3 touchdowns. But he didn't throw any interceptions, even though he did take 1 sack. So Kentucky doing a lot better at taking care of the ball in this game, but not able to get the ball moving to complete it. And you see that here in the running, where both teams ran 4 different rushers. Kentucky ran 35 times, Georgia ran 38. So very similar. but Georgia annihilates Kentucky on the ground. 229 yards and a touchdown against Kentucky's 57 yards and a touchdown. Now, a lot of those were Kentucky running backwards. As I was watching this game, I watched Oliveros lose at least 8 yards 3 different times. So that's going to hurt, but you're still not amounting over 100 yards, even if you count them in the negatives. For a team like Kentucky, who is a rush heavy team, like your legs are in Kelvin Dupree, who could, if he wanted to, challenge as a Heisman candidate if he got his legs going. Michael Oliveros could potentially do the same thing like we see Brandon Savage doing in Tennessee. If he can get his arm moving, if he can get his legs going, both of those players have legitimate shots to be considered top players in the country, and they're just not doing it right now. While Georgia is doing it, Antoine Harris leads Georgia with 22 of their 38 rushing attempts, and he runs for 169 yards just by himself and a single touchdown. He also added to that with 4 receptions for 35 yards. Kentucky's defense doesn't do awful. Like I said, they take away the ball 3 times, but they're not able to really turn that into anything. And 5 tackles for loss. Georgia doesn't get any interceptions, but they do hold Kentucky back with the 9 tackles for loss and a single sack. Kentucky goes 4 for 4 on their extra points. They hit 1 of their 2 field goals. The longest one coming from 40 yards, but they do miss a chip shot from 23 yards, which wouldn't have made much of a difference, but you've got to hit the field goals. We've talked about that all year last year. We harped on it. I'm sure people were tired of hearing it, but you have got to hit field goals if you're going to have a chance at all. Georgia doesn't even have to shoot any field goals. They go 7 for 7 on their extra points off their 7 touchdowns, and there's really nothing that they need to do field goal wise. So Kentucky's going to fall to 2-2 overall. They're going to be 1-1 in the SEC, put them 4th place in the East. Georgia's going to go up to 4-1 overall, 1-1 in the SEC, and the tiebreakers are going to put them in 3rd in the East. So congratulations, Georgia. Great game from them, and I think they really proved, even though Kentucky's not a top team, as I will keep saying, and people will try to tell me, no, they're great. No, Kentucky's not a top team, but they're still good, and Georgia was able to really come out and show that they are ready to be a top 15 contender in the country. Moving on to our next game, it's our game of the week. And the only reason I made this the game of the week is because it was really interesting to watch the entire time. Mississippi State taking on Alabama. Mississippi State does beat Alabama 17-13. But we talked about Alabama last week. They had only scored 9 points through week 5 on the season. Through 4 games, they had only scored 9 points, and none of them were a single touchdown. This game was interesting to watch because not only did Mississippi State, who is a good football team, barely beat a really bad Alabama team, they almost allowed Alabama to double their points on the season and allowed their first touchdown of the season. C. Breezy, T. Sweezy's cousin, the coach of Mississippi State, asked me if I was going to make fun of him today. I'm not going to make fun of Mississippi State. Alabama is still a good football team. They just haven't been able to put the pieces together. I'm still not sure why. Maybe we'll get an answer on that one day. But they still won the national championship last year. So to struggle against that kind of team is not anything to be, not really, you don't want to be concerned about it. Obviously, you want to be like, hey, this team has lost 5 games in a row, and we only beat them by 4. What happened? But it's not something that you have to change your entire program over. You still won. You still beat the defending national champions. You still won an SEC game. So Mississippi State goes 25 for 39 in their passing, 363 yards through the air with 2 touchdowns. They give up 2 interceptions and they take 2 sacks. Alabama, on the other hand, goes 13 for 26 passing. They only amount 112 yards through the air. They throw a touchdown, their sole touchdown of the year, but they do throw 3 interceptions and 2 sacks. So even though this was a rough game for Mississippi State offensively, you could say defensively they were there to keep Alabama at bay from really doing anything. And that means your defense is there, your defense is ready, but your offense wasn't able to generate those into game-changing points. Mississippi State runs it 30 times. They only get 62 yards. It's just kind of similar thing we saw with Kentucky. You get it on the ground, you've got to move the ball. Alabama is really the same thing. They do get over 100 yards, almost 200 yards. They get 188, but they ran it 43 times. You've got to see at least double the amount of yardage, I would imagine, if you're going to run it from 4 different guys trying to get something going on the ground. If you're not going to get it done through the air, you've got to get it through the ground. And right now, Alabama isn't able to do any of that. Like I said, defensively, Mississippi State has a great day. They get 3 interceptions, they get to 2 sacks, and they hit behind the line of scrimmage 5 times, and they do pick up a fumble recovery in this game. Alabama also has a great defensive game, which was really able to hold Mississippi State to only the 17. They get to 2 interceptions, they get to the quarterback twice, and they have 9 tackles for loss, and they pick up a fumble recovery, and they block a field goal. So, I mean, great game defensively from Alabama. They just can't get anything going offensively, really. On the special teams side, both teams hit all their extra points. Alabama hits both their field goals, the longest one coming from 54 yards. Mississippi State hits one of their field goals, it coming from 26 yards. The other one was from 40 plus, maybe even 50 plus yards. So you can't be too upset about that one if you're trying to ask a guy to hit 51 yards, but you still want to hit them. Mississippi State does have 2 guys as well who caught for over 100 yards. Chris Robles, the running back, had 8 catches for 112 yards and a touchdown, and wide receiver Chris Pulley had 7 catches for 141 yards and a touchdown. So Mississippi State's going to go up to 4-1 overall, 1-1 in the SEC, and 4th in the West. Alabama is going to continue to downslide, and at this point, you're probably not going to see them in the postseason, sitting at 0-5 overall, 0-3 in the SEC, and 7th in the West. Moving on to our next game, it's Ole Miss versus Arkansas. This is another one of our measuring stick games we talked about, and Ole Miss kind of crushes Arkansas 34-7. It's not that much of a different game when you look at the stats, but that's a big difference on the scoreboard, 27 points. So Ole Miss goes 17 for 31 on their passing, only 54% completion rate, but they do go for 266 yards. So when they're catching the ball, they're getting down the field. They do throw 2 touchdowns. They don't throw any interceptions. They do take 2 sacks. And they did throw in a backup quarterback for this game and hit 7 different receivers, which is nice to see when you're able to play your backup quarterback. Arkansas, a little bit of a less efficient day, 14 for 33. They get 42% of their completion rate. But again, when they throw the ball, they catch it, they're getting down the field with 226 yards, a single touchdown, and they do take 3 sacks. On the ground, Ole Miss has a much better day. They run it 38 times for 207 yards and 3 of their touchdowns. Arkansas, 27 times for 131 yards, and they can't get a touchdown of it. Ole Miss is led by Nick Hancock, who has 32 rushes and 191 yards just by himself, and he gets all 3 of their rushing touchdowns. Arkansas is led by Kurt Onhambo with 22 rushes and 113 yards. Defensively, not a standout game from either team. Ole Miss gets to the quarterback 3 times. That's their 3 tackles for loss. Arkansas gets to the quarterback twice, and they have 6 tackles for loss on the day. Neither team gets an interception, which is perfectly fine, but they've got to put more pressure behind that line if they're going to be more successful against teams that are on each other, I guess I could say. Now this is a game where it's kind of not great on the special teams. They go 4 for 5 on extra points for Ole Miss. They miss their single field goal attempt. Arkansas goes 1 for 1 on their 1 extra point attempt, and they miss all 3 of their field goal attempts. These were from all different ranges, 40 yards, chip shot. I mean, none of them were super short. None of them were super long. They were kind of in that mid-range where you need guys to hit them, and maybe you see some sort of game change. If Arkansas can hit some of those, they convert some points. They're not putting Ole Miss in great field position off that missed field goal. But Ole Miss is going to go to 4-2 overall, 3-0 in the SEC, so they're going to maintain first position in the West. Arkansas is going to be 3-3 overall, drop down to 1-2 in the SEC, and be 5th in the West. Checking in with one more game this week, it's going to be South Carolina versus Florida. South Carolina checking in at number 21. Like I said, this is another measuring stick game. And Florida loses by 10 points, but I feel like this was a much better game for Florida than what the scoreboard tells. And you're going to see that a little bit later too. South Carolina wins 27-17. This really was kind of an awful game from both sides. There's 8 total fumbles in this game. South Carolina picks it up one time. Florida recovered it 3 times. But off those 3 recoveries and the 3 sacks and the 10 tackles for loss, they're not able to really convert those into points. They get the ball moving on the ground, but their defense is there for them. Their offense kind of left it all at home today. Florida goes 9 for 19 on their passing, sub 500 on their completions. They only get 49 yards to the air, but they get both of their touchdowns from there. They do throw an interception and take 1 sack. On the other hand, South Carolina, 18 of 29 for 62%. They throw for 250 yards. They get 2 of their touchdowns there. They don't throw interceptions. They do take 3 sacks. On the ground, South Carolina has a decent day. They only run with 2 different guys. Corey Valverde being the leader there with 25 of their 31 rushing attempts. They get 152 yards total. He has 123 of them. Their sole touchdown comes from their other rusher, though. And then Florida has 4 different rushers. They run it 54 times for over 400 yards. Ryan Bowman leads the way with 20 different rushes, 163 yards. But they can't close it when it comes to the red zone, and they can't get any touchdowns to the ground. They get one of those, maybe hit a field goal that they missed 2 of, it's a totally different ballgame. So Florida is right there. They're on the cusp of being able to challenge the teams that have been holding the East. If they can take that next step, if they can just close out games, close out red zone drives, they'll be a dangerous contender. South Carolina, defensively, 1 interception takeaway, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss. Like I said, they pick up the ball 1 time on the ground. Florida doesn't take any interceptions, but they get to the quarterback 3 times, have 10 tackles for loss, and 3 fumble recoveries on the day. South Carolina has a pretty good day special teams-wise. They hit all 3 of their extra points. They hit 2 of their 3 field goals, the longest one coming from 45. Florida hits both their extra points, but they miss 2 of their 3 field goals. Their sole field goal comes from 43 yards. And like I said, if they make one of those field goals, it's a totally different ball game, especially if they can close out one of those red zone drives on the ground. South Carolina is going to go up to 4-1 overall, 2-1 in the SEC, so they're going to be second place in the East. Florida is going to fall to 3-2 overall, 1-2 in the SEC, and they're going to be 6th place in the East. The last 3 games we're not going to go into great detail about, but LSU beats Missouri 31-21. Auburn takes down Texas A&M 30-13, and Louisiana Monroe embarrasses Vanderbilt and the rest of the SEC, beating them 41-13. Vanderbilt de Linda Est. Player of the week this week, of course, is going to be Georgia's Corey Smith. They beat Kentucky, like I said, kind of a measuring stick game for that program. He gets 8 receptions, 233 yards just by himself, and he scores 3 of their 7 touchdowns on the day just by himself. And that puts Georgia in a place to really challenge Tennessee for that East Division title. So congratulations to Corey Smith in Georgia for the Player of the Week. It's not a quarterback this week, guys. I know it was a little bit of a struggle to not pick a quarterback, but we're going to try. We're going to check in with our standings real quick over here in the West. We kind of talked about these a little bit already, but Ole Miss is going to be leading the West at 3-0 in the SEC. Auburn sitting there in second place at 2-0. Still this early in the season with the imbalance of how many games people have played in conference, standings get a little wonky. Auburn is undefeated, but they've only played 2 SEC games. As their out-of-conference schedule starts to close out, and they have a game up against Ole Miss here soon, we're going to see that be challenged. LSU's checking in at 3rd place. Mississippi State that's sitting there at 4th. Arkansas in 5th. Texas A&M in 6th. And Alabama bringing up the rear in 7th. Tennessee was on a bye week this week, but they're still sitting at undefeated and 2-0 in the conference. So they're first place in the East. South Carolina improves their record to take second place in the East. Georgia moves up to third. Kentucky falls down to fourth. Missouri checking in at 5. Florida in at 6. And Vanderbilt bringing up the rear at 7. So that's your standings for the SEC in week 6. And now it's just our questions. And they're really the same as last week. We got some questions answered, but those kind of just brought up more. We're still wondering, is Auburn for real? They've only played 2 SEC games. They've played 3 out of conference. They've got 1 more out of conference left, and then they've got to run the SEC gauntlet. Can they do what they did last season and really challenge for that mantle of the SEC West? And with Alabama not standing in their way, is Ole Miss the only person standing in their way to take the West? And can Ole Miss sustain that success? Like I said, we saw them not necessarily fall apart, but backslide at roughly this point last season. So we're starting to get to that point of Ole Miss has got to answer, who are they? Are they going to take the West, or are they going to be sitting right in the middle of the table again? But LSU's also sitting right there. If Ole Miss or Auburn or even both of them fumble, is LSU able to step up and make themselves a challenger for the West Division? Over in the East, it's still all about Tennessee. Can anybody stop Tennessee? Can anybody stop Brandon Savage short of an Achilles tear? And then Georgia answered some questions this week, but now they've really got to ask themselves, is this what they are? Are they sitting at, that top middle of the SEC East, and that's kind of who they are now? Or are they ready already to challenge Tennessee for the SEC East? It's going to be a good question for them to answer, and eventually they're going to answer it soon, because Georgia and Tennessee are going to play here in a few weeks, and it's going to be a great game. Now, Florida, they are sitting at 1-2, but they're coming to the I don't want to say they're coming to the end of the hardest part of their schedule, but there's still plenty of SEC games to be played, and they showed how good they can be this week when they put the pieces together. So can they put those pieces together and have a chance to try to challenge Georgia for that upper middle part? I don't think at this point they'll be able to challenge Tennessee, but they could try to get themselves in that 2-3 range in the SEC East and really make themselves known as a contender for even next year. But we'll check in with next week. Mississippi State and Florida enter the poll at number 21 and number 24, and we've got a lot of good games next week. Alabama taking on Arkansas. Kentucky's going to host Florida, so Florida's going to get a chance to prove whether or not they can try to challenge, and Kentucky's going to try to get a chance to prove we're not that bad. Maybe we are, but we'll see next week. Ole Miss is going to take on Auburn. So like we said, this could be for the SEC West title right here, this Ole Miss-Auburn game. Ole Miss isn't ranked. I feel like that's a missed opportunity, an overlook by the committee. But they're not sitting there ranked right now. They're going to try and take on number 2 Auburn and show everybody that they deserve to be considered as one of the top teams in the country. Sitting at 3-0 in the SEC, they really should be. They should be in forefront of mind right now. Maybe not after the next game, but they've got a chance to prove it. Mississippi State, like we said, enters the poll at number 21. They're going to take on LSU. Missouri is going to take on number 20, South Carolina. Tennessee, still checking in at number 1 this week, is going to host Texas A&M, and then Vanderbilt is going to host number 10, Georgia. So that's going to give us 6 teams in the top 25 for the SEC now. Doing better. Remember, it's still the best conference in the country. Checking in with our recruiting. I did something a little different this week because I remembered that next season, Oklahoma and Texas are coming to the SEC. So as a conference, we have got to look out for what they're bringing in. Tennessee brings in 3 recruits, and 2 of them are 5 stars. If you were hoping that when Brandon Savage graduates that you were going to hear the last of Tennessee, Sorry, they just booked a 5-star quarterback in Jake O'Connor from Excelsior, Minnesota. And to back him up, they've got David France, a 5-star offensive tackle from Macon, Georgia. This goes back to the 2 5-star wide receivers that they've already closed in on and have signed. So if you want it to be done with Tennessee in the next couple years, sorry about your luck, Chuck. They're not going away. They're only going to get better. They also pick up the 4-star strong safety, Kevin Wells. Ole Miss picks up a 5-star wide receiver in John Mendoza. Kentucky finally starts getting their recruiting class going, picking up a 4-star center in Michael Bernstein. Georgia, 4-star defensive end in Jesse Shaw. Alabama still adding to that class that they're going to try to use to redeem themselves after the shambles of this year. They pick up a 4-star offensive linebacker. Missouri picks up 2 3-stars, an offensive tackle and wide receiver. Texas A&M picks up a 3-star. Don't ask me what that is. They pick up a 3-star. Vanderbilt also picks up a 3-star, so Vanderbilt's still being sneaky good. They picked up a few 4-stars towards the beginning of the season. So Vanderbilt's still not going away. And then LSU picks up a handful of 3-stars as well, including a punter. Now, looking at Oklahoma and Texas, and I will keep them in separate sections as we continue to watch them for their entry into the SEC. Oklahoma picks up a 3-star wide receiver, and Texas picks up 2 4-stars on defense. They're going to be difficult to deal with. Oklahoma and Texas have kind of been middle of the pack in the Big 12, maybe top of that middle of the pack, kind of in that Georgia, Kentucky, South Carolina range for the SEC. They're going to come in, they're going to perform pretty much the same, and the recruiting class is going to show that they are ready to contend at the SEC level and maintain that top middle of the pack. In our top 25 rankings, these are our sSEC weekly rankings. These are not the official rankings. These are our rankings. Tennessee coming in at number 6 and Georgia coming in at number 15. Now, I talked last week how these rankings get a little skewed because this early, it's mostly about how many recruits you have, not necessarily the quality. But you can see the quality that Tennessee's picking up. They only have 6 recruits. They're the highest ranked team with the least amount of recruits. East Carolina, of course, is checking in at number 1 with 9 recruits, but Tennessee only has 6, say only in air quotes, and they're number 6 on this list. Then the next team has 8, and then 6 and 7, 8. That's the quality of recruits that they're picking up. Georgia in at number 15, probably more where you would expect to see a team with 6 recruits. They're getting good quality guys. That's not to say that they're not. They're getting who they need to get. They're getting who they're supposed to get. And they're getting guys of quality enough that even with only 6, they're still checking in the top 25. So I appreciate you guys checking in. Like I said, if you've made it to the end of this video and you have not checked out our game yet, head down to the description. There'll be links. Come check out our website. Come check out the Discord. Talk to us. Still plenty of teams. Only halfway through the season. There's still a lot of season to go. And here towards the end of the month, we should be able to check in with basketball. And we'll get basketball going again. And maybe Kentucky can do something there. I don't know. Didn't do that great last season. But it's going to be a great time. I hope to see you guys there. And I appreciate it. Thank you.